All right, I will get started. My name is Missy Berg, and I am a counselor over at Prairie Ridge High School. I will start tonight by going through a presentation. It should take about 30 minutes. And now I'll hand it over to Julie and Rebecca to introduce themselves and kind of talk about the question part.
Hi, I'm Julie Carnes, and I'm one of the social workers at South High School. And tonight I'm going to be managing the questions. So if you wouldn't mind entering any questions you have throughout Missy's presentation by using the Q&A button as opposed to the chat. Actually, we've disabled the chat, hoping that we can kind of organize the questions in one spot. And we will save the questions for the end. I'll kind of keep track of them and kind of organize them so that we can answer them during the second half of the presentation.
And I'm Rebecca Sofford. I'm the vice principal at Cary Grove, and all three of us are on the Parent University Committee for the district, and I will help answer any questions if need be at the end.
Okay, so I will get started here. I'm going to share my screen with you guys and go through the presentation. So trying this again, just wondering if this looks like any of your students' faces. I don't know about your house, but I definitely had some of those faces throughout last semester. And what about you guys as parents? These facial expressions look familiar at all? This has been a very hard school year. This is not easy as a parent, as an educator, as a student. Tonight, I really do want to emphasize, I know it is not easy, but I also want to talk about how we can make it simple. And I'm going to break it down into 6 things that students can do, 5 things I want parents to be willing to try, and then supports that the school can offer. Starting with our students. Student to-do list, and this is no matter whether the student is choosing full-time remote, coming back hybrid, staying in synchronized Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or on those asynchronous days on Wednesdays. No matter what their schedule looks like, these are all important things. First, what does their school environment look like? It's important, and again, not easy, in your house to create a designated school area for your student. We have 3 kids in our house, and I can say it is not easy to find these areas, but important in those school areas is having a hard surface like a desk or a table. For some students, maybe even consider a standing station. This might help them focus. The hard part for me is we're creating an environment where we say home should be respite and relaxation, school should be brick and mortar and structure, and we've asked all of you guys to combine those. So when you're thinking about that school environment for your student, I highly recommend that it is not in the bedroom. That's not always possible. I know it was difficult in our house, but at least not in a bed or beanbag chair or soft surface. If they have to be in their bedroom, try to help them create a space where they're back to that desk or table or hard surface. In this environment, what's hard for me is we always think about, no, I don't want to be in the bedroom, but the reason I don't want them in the bedroom is actually to do with allowing them that safe space for them to relax. So when we combine those two, it just gets very difficult for students. I also encourage that school environment to be the space that they use for their school day when they're home, but also for the homework at night. A lot of research is showing those physical cues in that environment is helping your student to focus better. And really important is limiting distractions. Again, not easy when we've asked your school environment to be in your homes, but in that school environment, try to help your student have no other computers, gaming systems, phones. Phones have been a tricky one because I do have some math teachers here who remind me it is a lot easier for students to upload into Canvas from a phone. So if they have to have a phone by them, kind of this picture you're looking at, have that phone behind their Chromebook, and so that they're only pulling it out when they need it. Distractions in the home environment are even pets and family members. So as you think about that designated school area, think about a space where there is limited distractions even from those pets and other family members in the home. The second thing is attending and engagement. It's really important that your student attends the full period. As you look at this screenshot I gave you, I kind of challenge you to think about, look at all those squares and who do you think is really engaged in that lesson? Who do you think isn't engaged? We can all find 3 screens that I think we would argue probably aren't engaged in that lesson. This is what we see all day. And for teachers, what's so important is that that camera is on at all times. We can't enforce that at school. So that their camera is on, but also that their camera is showing their face. We've all been in those meetings when someone's turned the camera off. Think about it for yourself. When you turn that camera off, what are you doing? You're probably not focused. You're addressing something else that's going on. So keeping that camera on and on their faces allows for that teacher to truly engage with your student. Nothing replaces that curriculum or teaching. So when your student misses, they miss out on so much. Another thing that's really important for the student is a daily routine. And this is important for a student to follow no matter, again, whether they're hybrid or they're remote, if it's an asynchronous day or a synchronous day. Now I'm going to pick on us a little bit here. When I say routine and follow that schedule every day, you have just learned with your child, we had a schedule first semester and then we changed it. Second semester, we have yet another schedule. We have synchronous days and asynchronous days. So I'm the first to say we have not made this easy on your student. And that's why it is so important for them to have this schedule next to them, but getting in the habit of that daily routine, even on asynchronous days. And what I like to say about asynchronous days, the importance there is we want to give students a break from that Zoom. Zooming all day is exhausting for students and for educators. But giving the students a break from Zoom, I still feel it's very important that the asynchronous day, the first hour from 9 to 9:30, is still the practice of the skills of whatever the class that is for them. So that asynchronous day is not a day off. That asynchronous day is your student following your schedule like normal, but they might not have to Zoom into a teacher or get extra help. It's just their time set aside to practice the skills, do their homework, and kind of get organized for that next day. Include in that routine, and this was really hard when we said, hey, school is going to be at home, having your student follow the same routine they would if they were going to school. So whether that included a shower, breakfast, whatever they would do if they left the school or left for school is what they should be doing in that routine. Organization and time management. Although I think all 6 of these skills are important, this is the one I'm finding might be the most important skill that our students don't have right now. Organization and time management, if you can see this screenshot, it's really important for your student to have a daily planner that has day hours and evening hours. And what you can see in this example is the importance of a student writing out exactly where they're going to spend their time. On a school day, it's important that they cross off when they're not available. So from 8 to 3 or whenever they're in class, they need to cross that off. They're not available because they're actually in school. I also encourage students to cross off practice times, dinner, work, any extracurricular things that they're responsible for doing in that evening, cross those times off. What that does is gives the student a visual of when they do have time in their evening to do that daily practice and that homework. Canvas versus planner. Canvas is great for your student, and Canvas is where they're going to see a list of assignments and they will submit their assignments. However, Canvas doesn't help your student say when and where they will do those assignments. That's the purpose of the planner. So as your student kind of plans out their day and night and they're crossing off the times they're not available, it's really important that they look at those Canvas pages and get every single one of those Canvas assignments into a specific spot in their evening. What we're finding is students are getting a little more disorganized because they have the list of assignments in Canvas, but they're not telling themselves when they'll get those done. Then those build and build and build, and now the student just feels more and more behind and at a loss of where to start. Planners, my recommendation with planners, Office Max, Target, Walmart, they have a bunch of different examples, but don't go buy it for your student. I really encourage you to have your student go with you and pick out what they feel will work best for them. But if I emphasize anything in that planner, it would be that it has those evening hours there. Another skill is the homework. I would love to replace the word homework with practice. You know, if you've got a student who plays a sport or an instrument or anything that they do outside of school, I always say they wouldn't be good at that if they didn't do the practice part. And so many of them and the things they enjoy, they do that practice part on their own in addition to a structured practice. That's what homework is. Homework is the whole purpose is, hey, student, I want you to step away from this instruction right now and go practice it. And then I want you to come back and let me know when you turn that homework in, do you know what you're doing? Great, keep it up. But if you don't, and this is the really important part at this age level, is if you don't know what you're doing, what is that next step? The teachers have been here and kids have been at home. And so I think so many students feel like they can't get the help. That is the whole purpose of that student support time, which is built into the daily schedule. It's really the purpose behind Wednesday's asynchronous days. There is help. And I want to make sure your student does the daily practice just so they see, do I need help or not? The other part, which I think we so often forget, is another purpose of that daily practice and homework is feedback. And there's two different feedbacks going on here. One is the feedback to the student. Again, just saying, hey, student, do this homework. I graded it. Good news, you know what you're doing. Or, hey, student, no, you really struggled with this. You don't know what you're doing. When do you want to come in for help? There's another piece of feedback, though, that's really important in that daily practice and homework. And that's the feedback for the teacher. The teacher only sees that homework in regards to, does your student know what they're doing, or do they need that extra help? So the feedback for the teacher is, where am I losing that student? If you're the 5th or 6th student who has turned this in and you're missing it, that's a great teachable moment for me, and I'm going to go back and redo that lesson. So the importance of that daily practice, long ago, your student started coming home saying, no, mom, dad, you don't understand. That work isn't worth much. It's worth 5 points. It's formative, not summative. It is so important to do that homework because that's the only chance that that kid has to see if they know the curriculum. And it's the only chance that teacher has before that larger summative to reach out to that kid and help. I'm going to argue this daily practice and homework is even more important right now while we're in this remote and hybrid learning, because we're not seeing the student every day and we can't check in every day. So this homework is the one thing that we're relying on. I said in that previous about the environment, I do think that it's really important for the homework to also be done in that same school environment if possible. Again, there's some research out there of the physical cues the student is getting to help them focus. Again, we just talked about this in the planner, but this daily practice has to have a spot in that daily planner, telling the student when they're going to get it done that night. And then also important for your student is that they take time-limited breaks. So research kind of shows a student can be on 30 to 40 minutes of focus, and then they're going to need a 10 to 15 minute break. So a rule of thumb, kind of a place to start, is 30 minutes on doing that daily practice. And then for some of those students who have a tough time stepping away or kind of building in those breaks, have a timer go off. Now go take a 10-minute break, and take that 10-minute break outside of the school environment. Go take a few laps around the house or go up and down the stairs and then come back. But the time limit must be set for the homework practice. Remember, it's in that planner and they've got a designated time, but they also need to build in those breaks in order to come back to it. The last one for the students is, again, those resources. If your student is struggling and you are working on the environment and the routine and the engagement and that organization, that last piece is going to be, okay, so if you've done that homework and you are still struggling as a student, I want you as a parent, your reaction to be, what is your teacher recommending that would help? You're cueing for that kid. It's okay not to understand and it's okay to struggle, but what are you going to do about it? A lot of parents have reached out to me kind of saying, you don't understand, he doesn't know how to get the help. There are some easy ways. As much as I fight technology, the one easier thing with communication for these kids is technology. So they can private chat their teacher during class time to try to set up a time to meet. They can email their teacher. If they're doing that homework at night, it's in their planner and they've designated that time and they're doing it, and that's when they realize they're struggling, tell your student right then to send the email to the teacher. The purpose of the email isn't, Ms. Patel, I don't understand. The purpose of the email is, I'm really struggling. Is there a time tomorrow that we could meet during the student support hours or after school, or whatever works with your student? There's also those already built-in student support time. So there's daily student support time from 7 to 7:55 on that Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And then Wednesday's asynchronous day is allowing for those teachers and students to kind of meet. It doesn't mean that the teacher is going to know that student needs help. So we definitely want to encourage that student to reach out. I also want to take a second here and just talk about the difference between private tutors, outside supports, mathnasium. There's some things in our community that teachers or that parents have reached out to that seem to be working for students. The only thing I want to err kind of on caution you guys about is there's a difference between your student seeing someone else for that help and your student seeing our teachers. By no means is one better than the other. I'm not implying that. However, when we go back to that previous screen, I was talking about the importance of daily practice and homework. It's that feedback, not just feedback to your student of whether they know what they're doing. It's the only feedback for the teacher to say, where am I losing your student? So if those supports are better for you for some reason, I am not here to say don't use them. But remember, the power of your student doing that daily practice and struggling and bringing the teacher into that loop is the best opportunity we have for that teacher to reteach or catch your student up with that curriculum. The thing I really want to emphasize with students is the importance of multiple circles of support. So you are wonderful support for your student, and I have no doubt. I think we kind of complicated it when we said you're already supportive and now we're going to keep them home with you. And I feel like as a mom, and probably you at home, we became more of a support to our children just because of accessibility and we were there. I want to go back to the importance of you being there is wonderful. But your role is, hey, who could you reach out to? Hey, what did that teacher say? Because we want to help your student right now practice multiple circles of support in this building, in addition to you at home. Now I'm going to switch gears here and we're going to do a little parent to tries. I do wish I could look all of you guys in the eye. This is really hard for me to do this kind of presentation virtual. But I really do want to look you in the eye and just say all of these parent to tries, I assure you, I struggle with and I try to do every day. So these aren't easy, but I'm going to break down kind of why they're important. The first one, which is a hard one to swallow, when your student comes to you and they're struggling, you've got to say in your head, you're not my problem to fix. Don't say it out loud to your kid. That's not a good thing. But say in your head, you're not my problem to fix, because what that does is it resets it for us. It is easy as a parent. We've been there, we've done that. We know what the solution is. Let's swoop in here and fix it for them. I intentionally chose to work with high school students because we have 4 short years, parents, to allow them the practice of these skills so that by the time they leave us, they're good to go. The importance of this one is kind of twofold. When a student comes to us and says, hey, mom or dad, I'm having this problem. One is the problem solving piece. We know the answer and we want to jump in there. However, the best thing for your student is to develop and practice on their own. Hey, what if I solved it this way? What if I solved it this way? And kind of talk through those pros and cons. They need the experience, and this is what's tough sometimes. They need that stressor. They need the reaction to that stressor. They need the feedback from that stressor to tell them their current system isn't working. This is not going to work for me. That can be grades, that can be benched or cut, or some negative feedback from a peer or an adult in their lives. They need that stressor, because with that stressor then comes, hey, here's how I'm going to try some things. And then they figure out systems that work for them. If we step in, we really hinder that development of those skills, and even more important, the practice of those skills. The second piece, when we step in and solve a problem, and this is what's happened a lot over the past 10 years, is we have a bad habit of stepping in and shutting off that emotion for them. So it's hard as a parent when your child comes to you and is highly anxious or very sad and is tearful or frustrated. And all we want to do is stop that emotion for them because our heart's in the right place. But ironically, that's the worst thing we can do. We've got to allow the student, your child, to feel that emotion. And we need to remember in the back of our head, no emotion is bad or negative. Emotions just are. And when we think about emotions, the wonderful thing about our body is its ability, that homeostasis, to get back to where it needs to be. So let them feel that emotion. Just sit with them. They're going to see how their body, just on its own, will get them back to that homeostasis, that other side where they feel comfort again. And so often, if you guys think in your life, and I'm a very emotional person, so I think I'm justifying this for myself, but so often in our life, you need that emotion to get to the problem-solving part. So sit with your child, allow them to feel that emotion, and then they can get to that problem-solving. And remind yourself, don't hinder that development. They need that stressor to try some of that would work. What can you do to help? Because by no means am I saying you're helpless. It comes down to three things. The importance of listening. And what's really hard with our own kids is to listen with only the intent to understand where they're coming from. Don't fix it. So often we're listening to enough to jump in with that solution. No, listen only with the intent to understand. And this is where I talk about a little bit of difference between sympathy and empathy. As a parent, this is where you really want to practice empathy. Put yourself in their shoes. Sympathy is, I feel sorry for you, and so now I'm going to step in and fix that. No, empathy, just sit with them. Validate their emotion. Give them words for the emotions they're feeling. And then lastly, ask, what do you think would help? What do you want to try? Let them talk through some of those possible options. The second thing for parents, and this is really hard, but so important with only 4 years of high school, it's time to hand over those reins. Every skill that your child's going to learn in life is going to go through these different stages. First, you're going to do a skill for your kid. And so I always like to use crossing the street as an example. So your kid is going to go through these stages: for, with, watch, and independent before they can cross that street by themselves. First, they can't walk. So at 2 months old, you're going to do it for them. You're going to hold them and you're going to walk them across the street. At 2 years old, they can walk, and you're going to do it with them. And you're going to hold their hand and you're going to get them across the street. Then hopefully 5, 6 years old, as you're watching them cross the street to get to that bus stop, you're on this front stoop. They're the ones that are walking across that street. And the important part of your job is a ton of feedback. Look both ways. Did you look to the right? Whoa, 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 come back. There's a car coming. Did you see the bicycler? You give so much feedback at that stage. And then finally, they do that skill independent. I'm going to argue there's not a skill right now for your high school student where they shouldn't be at that watch and give them a ton of feedback or independent. I'm a runner, so this is an easy analogy for me. Life, raising your young person is a marathon, not a sprint. When we think of a sprint, if someone trips and falls, the race is over, they've lost. But a marathon, you can go to the bathroom, you can get drinks, you can sit on the curb, you can stretch, and you still can finish that. That's what life is for your kid. The importance of handing over that reins is to be in that watch and give feedback so that your child can practice, practice, practice. Growth mindset is all about that process. Don't focus on the results. We've got to get away from that. In each of these moments, when your student is practicing and getting that feedback, that's how they're going to eventually be independent. And just a reminder of the gift of failure, there's kind of that quote out there: the more you do, the more you're going to fail and get a bunch of feedback, but also the more you learn. Quick examples for you guys with Skyward. Keep in mind, my advice with Skyward Check it once a week and have your kid be the one. Every Sunday afternoon, sits down and pulls up skyward. I don't want your finger on the button. I want your kid to own those grades. Naviance, if you've ever heard of Naviance, it's a program that we use with students, and a lot of times we get the teacher or the parent that'll say, hey, can I have that password? No, I want your kid to be the driver of that, but I do hope you can sit with your kid. Concerns with teachers, coaches. This is where we need to help our kid and role model for our kid how to communicate when they have those concerns. Have them copy you on that email if you want. Certainly sit with them and help them write that email. The importance here is trust but verify. So if your kid keeps telling you the same thing, so now you say, you know what, I don't believe him, I want to jump in here. No, it's okay to verify, but have your student be the one that communicates and then copies you. Madeline Levine, one of my favorite lines is, don't do for your kid what they can already do or almost do for themselves. They need that practice and feedback. A behavior change versus grades. So a lot of times as a counselor, I pull a student in, I'm saying, hey, what's going on? Looks like you're struggling. And inevitably the student will say, don't worry, Mrs. Berg, I'm going to do better. Better is way too big. This is where we need to break it down and not talk about that end result of grades. Break it down to just a certain behavior change. What is one thing, son or daughter, you can do differently right now? And let's see how it goes. Keep in mind, those grades are just feedback. If to the student things are going well, keep it up. If those grades aren't well, that's feedback to them that they're going to want to tweak something. If they're doing all those other parts, the environment, the attending, the routine, the planner, the daily practice, the resources, if they're doing all of those parts and they're still struggling, that's an important time for that teacher to step in and support your student. The grades are going to come when they start perfecting these pieces. The power of Skyward, just so you guys know, is not in that initial screen of grades, that little squares with the grades. No, the power of Skyward is your student sitting down with you and clicking on each of those grades. When you get into the grade book, that's where you can see, how are you doing on that formative? How are your summatives? Is there any missing work? That's what leads to behavior change, not the grades. Think for your student, encourage them what's just one thing they can do differently. And then really important, following up with your kid every couple days. Hey, how's that strategy going that you're trying? That's that accountability piece, but also an opportunity for your student to say, no, it's not going so well. Okay, let's try something different. Two more for you guys. Scaffolding. What do we know about scaffolding? Scaffolding, as you look at this picture, is all about, there's this certain bar, the height of the building that we need to get to. So we put in all of these supports to get there. What's really important to remember about scaffolding is by no means are we lowering that bar or that building. We're keeping it here and we're just putting all of these strategies in place to get there. That's the way I want you to think about supports for your student. If your student is struggling, they don't need less practice, they need more practice. Remember the importance of struggle and feedback and failure. As your student struggles, what we need to do is put in supports that allow your student to practice that skill even more, not avoid it or erase it or try to clean it off the slate. No, they need those experiences in order to learn from it. Help your student find a system that does work for them and keep the bar at that level. The importance of strategies is that we put things in place that help your student time and time again practice that skill. Real quick, just some easy examples with speeches. We'll often get students or parents that say, no, you don't understand, my student really struggles with speeches. Don't omit speeches from your child's life. That's the worst thing we can do. Instead, let's build in lots of little practices. They do it in front of a video camera. They do it in front of the dog. They do it in front of you. Then they do it in front of me. Then they do it in front of the teacher. And then they build up to that classroom. But build in more practice, not less. A new one this year is students who say, no, you don't understand. I can't have the camera on. It makes me feel too anxious, or too, you fill in the blank. No. The reality, again, as much as I don't embrace technology as much as I should, the camera being on is going to be good practice for your student, because your student is likely, whether it's college, a job, a tech, a trade, there are going to be classes and trainings and things they have to do online, and they're going to have to get used to this camera piece. One last one, just that extended time. So often parents and students feel like, hey, if I just had a little more time. Think about that though in life, how often we have these, especially in work, we have these deadlines and these time constraints that we have to meet. It's the best way in the supportive environment for us to help your student practice more of those constraints than avoid those. And then I just like to throw in here with attention issues and concerns and anxiety and some of these larger mental health pieces, a strategy would be mindfulness. A 504 plan that says, please don't make my kid do this is where we struggle and we're omitting that practice that is so important for your student. And the last one for you guys is trying to get in the practice of using and instead of so. This has been the toughest year on so many of our young people. As a parent, what happens is when we say, you know, this has been a tough year, so I'm going to let this slide. This has been a tough year, so I'm going to not make him do this. This has been a tough year. He hasn't had this season, school, the senior year at football, you fill in the blank. And then when we follow it up with more of an impulsive or emotional response, we have to keep in mind there are going to be other obstacles in your student's life. So keeping that in mind as a parent, intentional parenting is our most important job. I want you guys all to take a quick second and just think, where do you want your kid to be at 18? This is the most important goal planning you could ever have. When you envision where you want them to be at 18 and you work backwards, that's where you come up with expectations, values, rules, behavior, the things that you know your kid needs to do in order to get there. The way I look at intentional parenting is like a grocery list. I don't know about you guys, but if I go to the grocery without a grocery list, it inevitably turns into impulsive buying, whatever's on sale. I don't even necessarily need it or want it, but I'm going to buy it. Or even worse, after a hard day of work and I'm driving home and I have to stop at Jewel to get some things and I don't have that list, I emotionally buy. So ice cream looks good after a bad day and I throw that in the cart as well. Intentional parenting is the opposite. It's parenting with that grocery list. So here's who I want at 18. Here's along the way my expectations, the values, the rules, all of these things I have to go to. It is so important to plan ahead as a parent. Write it down in those kind of what I call contracts. Have an agreement between you and a spouse if there's a spouse in the house. Refer to this often and open with your child. It is so important for us to have these expectations, values, and rules for our kid so that by the time they're 18, they are independent where they need to be, but also because they will continue to get these obstacles. So it's all the more important that we have this intentional parenting. If your student is struggling and they're doing those 6 things I recommended, and you as a parent are trying 2 or 3 of the 5 things I recommended for you, and they are still struggling, please keep in mind, even though your student might be there and we're here, we do have supports in the school. Academically speaking, I always recommend, again, for that feedback piece, if your kid is struggling in one class, encourage your student to reach out to that teacher specifically. Again, we've built into the schedule some time where they can meet. If your student consistently is struggling and that individual help isn't enough, we also offer several support periods and resources in the school day. There's a literacy center, a math support, a science support, there's guided study hall. So there are some supports in place of their free period that we could give them daily support. Also, counselors and student services. If your student is kind of struggling overall, it's 4 classes and it's affecting their mental health and there's so much at play here. That's counselors and social workers and student services personnel. And we can kind of step in and put a plan in place of maybe some of these things I just talked about, but maybe additional supports as well. If on the other hand, your student is more struggling with that social emotional and isolation and just not having the involvement that they had, definitely reach out to your school student services team. Your student has a counselor, a social worker, a school psych, a nurse, a dean, all on their team. it doesn't matter who you reach out to one of them. We'll consult with each other and kind of come up with a plan of how to help your student. There's other students and families who say, hey, there's a lot going on. She's really struggling, but we would prefer to have some supports outside of school. We're good for that too. We've got a good referral system with our community, and we can help you guys find those supports. I am going to turn it over now. I am done doing all of the talking, and I will turn it over to Ms. Carnes, who can kind of get a little Q&A going.
Yeah, so I've been kind of keeping track of the questions. There were a couple of duplicates that I grouped together, and I think we're going to probably maybe need all three of us for some of the answers. So I guess the first one, Rebecca, they're asking if these presentations will be posted or the recordings would be somewhere they could access them.
Yeah, so if some of you were here last Wednesday, we did have some technical difficulties and that did not get recorded. I have reached out to the presenter and asked him if he could kind of do a tape a presentation of him just doing it, and we'll post it. But this one for sure we know is recording. If you go to the district website and you go under parents, there is a button for Parent University, and that's where it will be posted. So I would give it a couple of days. Our tech guys will have to pull this off and clean it up a little bit and then get it posted. But we should definitely have that on there. And like I said, we're still working on the one from last week.
Great. Then we also had a couple of people asking about how would they know if their student's camera was consistently not on, and some parents not wanting to disturb, their student if they're in a quiet space. My first thought was to ask your student, and if I have a teenager myself, so if you're not quite sure about the answer you get, in my experience as part of the MTSS team, I know if it is a consistent issue and that lack of engagement is of concern, somebody on the team is going to be reaching out to the parent. But I don't know, it's pretty widespread, the camera issue, I think. So I don't know if it's handled differently in other buildings or.
I would say, I agree with Julie. The first thing is ask your student. I mean, yes, they're teenagers. Yes, they lie, but you'll watch their facial expressions. You're going to know right away. The only thing I would add to that is I do think you would know if it was a concern. However, it has been very difficult for teachers because they've only got those 40 minutes to teach. And so even when I go into the classroom, I go into junior seminar and I've made that statement, hey, I want those cameras on. You guys, I can't make them. I've got nothing to make them do it. And teachers aren't going to stay in that struggle because they want to get to the curriculum and the teaching. So I would definitely ask your kid. The only other thing I think you could do is reach out to a counselor, to a social worker, and just say, hey, have you had any feedback? And we could let you know. But I think your kid would, just from the facial expressions, probably tell you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we had a question, a parent who really likes the suggestions, but said, when I step in, it seems to escalate things and make things worse. And so should they just allow for those natural consequences to occur? And there seems to kind of be a disconnect. And I guess I'll just kind of start by saying, I think, like Missy said, you don't necessarily, want to swoop in and take away all consequences, because that's how kids learn and that's how they grow. So I know natural consequences has been a popular topic for us in student services, because without them kind of feeling that, and like Missy said, even with, failing at some tasks, they don't really learn how to fix it and how to improve that skill. So I wouldn't consider natural consequences as a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just giving that feedback, along the way without, getting over involved, just kind of, listening and kind of giving some feedback without taking over.
And this is so tough not being able to because I'm not sure exactly what you mean by this question. But I think the only other thing I would throw on there is, again, back to that intentional parenting. I do think it's very important as parents for us to lay out what are our rules and expectations in our house for our child. And as much as people make fun of me writing those down, it's on a contract and kid sees it and I see it often. We're talking about it often. So if, I'd stay away from the grade. If your expectation is no missing assignments, that's one in our house, then each Sunday when I sit down and my kid is the one looking at it, I don't make it about the grade. I make it about the missing assignments. So think about the behaviors, expectations in your house and how can you tie that into the conversation with your student, and that is where then consequences might happen in your house. The only other little bit I kind of got out of that is how do you have this conversation without them blowing up? You're their safe zone. So no, none of us like them to blow up on us, but I always try to remind myself I'm their safe spot. And so this is where they're going to show the emotion. If it continues and you're really concerned about it and you're not sure how to approach this with your child, it's a great time to reach out to student services and say, hey, counselor, social worker, it looks like, and again, go back to those behaviors, it looks like he's missing a lot of assignments. I'm really concerned. We'll problem solve with you, knowing your kid or learning from your kid if it's a freshman and we don't know him or her very well. But email us or call us and let us kind of give you some specific ideas, things to try that maybe other students have been successful with, and then you can go back and try that.
Okay, and then in hybrid, does a teacher provide feedback to parents if a student needs help? I would say now that we have those asynchronous Wednesdays, any student who is struggling, that usually the teacher is reaching out to have that student attend class either by Zoom or in person if they're hybrid. So it's kind of nice because I think with this structure, you're going to know that your kid is struggling if the teacher is pulling them in on those Wednesdays. And I would say, that open line of communication with teachers, we usually want it to be student driven. So it probably would be best to start that conversation, with your student to see, where they're struggling.
And that, once a week skyward piece where your student's sitting down and pulling up, and again, not the initial grid, but clicking on those grades, you do have some data every couple days of how much they're struggling. So I would build that into your household expectations of every Sunday or whatever works for you. I just want to help you practice being kind of the owner of these grades. And so you can see in there if they're struggling, and then it's okay to say, hey, this is your third missing assignment, or you're getting low scores. I want you to try something different, and have your student email the teacher and copy you while you're watching. Help them word it, but don't be the one to push those buttons.
You just kind of answered the last question there, Missy.
Oh.
So a student who is very shy and uncomfortable reaching out to teachers, is it okay for me to reach out to a teacher and request that they kind of reach out to the student and ask if he or she needs help? The parent keeps encouraging her to ask for help, but she won't. And, the parent doesn't want to get over involved. So I was going to suggest sitting with the student and drafting that email together, because again, that practice of that skill is, the only way the student's going to master that and increase their comfort doing it is by doing it and being exposed to doing that.
And that's what I would say when we think about things that make us uncomfortable. The less practice, I'm just getting worse and worse at it. And this is where, again, I don't love technology, but technology does make it easier for that student, and you role modeling how to send that. But that is one of the most important skills they're going to need when they leave here, no matter what's next for them, is that advocacy piece. So don't not have them do it. Say, you're doing it. How would you like to do it?
Go ahead.
I just want to jump in on and talk about those Wednesdays, because this came up last week. I think sometimes people aren't 100% sure what is happening on those days, and we keep talking about, if it's doing poorly, the teacher's going to ask to Zoom in, meet with them. But what you also want to know is that a student doesn't have to be doing poorly to meet with their teacher on that day. So let's say they're getting a B or, you know, a B minus or C plus, and they're just struggling with assignment. They could still be getting an A and struggling with certain assignment. They can email their teacher and say, hey, can I meet with you on Wednesday? And they can set up a Zoom time to meet. So those days aren't just for kids that are doing poorly. It's for any kid that might want to work with their teacher on that day.
Yes.
And it's such great practice for that kid that might be shy or not used to asking for help and stuff, because it is more one-on-one, which is more comfortable for all of us.
Okay, we got another addition here. I appreciate the comments on it's not about the grades, but at the end of the day, grades are one of the key drivers in success of college application process. How do we find the right balance between parenting to behaviors, but also keeping a focus on the key metric with grades?
So I love this conversation, and whoever wrote this question, if I don't quite answer it because it's hard without specifics, I am happy to talk with you later. You can email me. You know, I went to a great conference that really we've got to keep in mind if, you know, career drives college, and if your kid is looking into careers that is in they're going to go to college. College is about a fit, not a destination. And this is where I wish I could look this person in the eye and say, if you look at average GPAs for 50 different colleges, and I'm talking about a range of colleges, as long as a student is at a 2.0, a C student, they are admissible to colleges. And when we're talking about that fit, it's really important that we say, hey, my kid is struggling at this level. They're earning, and here's what I want to start with. C is average. Sometime along the way, 50 years ago, we got away from that, but a C is an average. A C is a student who can be successful in college. That being said, we tend to, society-wise, go towards certain colleges, and then we hope for scholarship for those colleges. Yes, you are absolutely right. There's going to need to be a certain GPA for certain levels of colleges and for scholarship money. But the flip side of that, if we're looking at this as a process and not that end result, then that process, when our kid struggles, we don't want to make it all about that grade and everybody step in and do and help and all this, and they get here. Those are our kids, and I pick on us because I know the data, the District 155 data of recidivism rates in college and graduation within 6 years is not where I want it to be. So we've got to look at this process is so important for that student, not to get into college. The process is important because we want our student to be successful when they get there. And I know that's loosey-goosey. Again, I would love to have this conversation with you. But this year, senior year, as I'm working with these students, C average is admissible. But it does depend on what skills you want your kid to have that success when they get there and what type of school they're looking at.
And those were all of the questions.
Okay. If, you know, this is so strange because we can't see you, we can't hear you. If there's any follow-up here that I can answer, Julie, Rebecca, please email us. We really appreciate you guys taking time out of your evening and sitting in. Hopefully this sparks some good conversations at home with your spouse or your child, and don't hesitate to reach out to your student services or administration in your building either. Okay. Have a good night.
Thanks.